next up into our holiday series, we have A Christmas Carol. Ever since Charles Dickens penned this classic tale of redemption, there have been as many remakes of this story as there are ways that we celebrate Christmas around the world. So we'll look at three versions, including a 1951 black and white version, a made-for-television Western, and a comedy from 1988. Once again, I'm John Chang, and this is Dan Edmonds.
Hello, hello.
And I think before we kind of dive into, talking about the 51 and stuff like that, one of the things I find that seems to be, an interesting point of all this is that, what is it about, like, kind of these holiday movies that, like, we tend to have redemption, like, kind of being a theme, whereas, you would think that we would kind of focus more on, like, lighthearted fare, rom-coms or, action, stuff like that, which a lot of the movies are. But for some reason, these holiday pictures seem to just somehow, gravitate towards redemption. Because even, when we talk about It's a Wonderful Life, that was really, one of the core ideas as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think I think about just like, what is the social circumstance of Christmas? It's you're with your family. You may have had your differences over the years. and you're going to be taking stock at the end of the year. So redemption stories are always kind of like about forgiving people. So I think it's kind of a taking stock and forgiving idea and concept that goes on in these. I think that's maybe what people identify with over the holiday period, which is funny because it's kind of, like you said, you would have thought you'd just want to celebrate, maybe watch some comedies. And I suppose I've watched a lot of comedies over Christmas, but it's interesting how redemptive arcs are so pervasive with Christmas stories.
Yeah, and I think, that taking stock idea really is at the heart of it, because certainly, just about all of us, we tend to do these New Year's resolutions. So around the holidays, before we kind of gather around the fire and, sip eggnog and stuff like that, we do tend to take into account, like, what did this, year past bring and stuff as we go into the new year, and like, what do I want to have happen in the coming year?
Absolutely. And I think after watching this and It's a Wonderful Life, one of the things that's really struck me as a very powerful storytelling concept is this idea of seeing someone's life in its entirety through their past, through what's happening to them now. And what's clever about A Christmas Carol is that you're seeing the potential future of this person. So it not only are you kind of taking that perspective on a very much sort of long-term view as the viewer, but you're also thinking about what potential changes you might make in your life, just like the character does. And it's very hard to watch something like It's a Wonderful Life or Christmas Carol without also yourself looking back on your life as well, also sort of identifying with that long perspective.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And I know of at least one life coach who specifically uses that format for, basically taking people through their, just life stories, stuff like that. He'll have people like journal about the past, journal about the present and stuff, and then journal about their vision of the future. So basically, like, it's right there. He's using what you just said, that, taking stock of your life, past, present, and future, to basically help people to kind of, change their lives in a more positive way. And so I think that's an interesting kind of, aspect of that, he actually, like, actively uses that, method and stuff.
It's an interesting side note for a business idea.
Okay.
You could make a heavily influenced Dickensian taking stock of one's life experience at several $100,000 for billionaires, where you take them through the Scrooge experience or something like that.
The Scrooge experience.
Visitation, hire Tiny Tims to come in. I don't know.
Yeah, it'd be interesting in the future, like we talk about, like, kind of AI and that kind of thing and stuff like that, or virtual reality. It would be interesting kind of with something like a Westworld experience, right? Where that's actually what you do, that would be mind blowing.
You probably could do it with enough accuracy if you could gather enough data about someone's life that you could recreate their past, so it could transport you back into your past, at least on a sort of through some sort of AI brain interface or something. That'd be pretty interesting.
Absolutely.
Getting on track there, but yeah.
So let's talk first about the 1951 version. This one was black and white, and for me, like, we really see, like, the classic kind of, like you said, Charles Dickens, his time period stuff. It's really a different time, and so that's one of the things I think that's fascinating about A Christmas Carol, as we'll see, with these other versions and stuff, is that the story is, even though like the original one is very much dated, a kind of very specific period in, world history and stuff, but it's pretty timeless in a lot of ways.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think we were sort of discussing this about how Scrooge does represent modern society quite a lot, really. And I think there's sort of various ways in which Dickens subverts the Christmas or the sort of the general themes of Christmas to his own storytelling means. In that, Scrooge is there saying, Christmas is bar humbug, it's basically BS. Because in a way it was a Christian rebranding exercise of a pagan holiday.
Yeah.
And Dickens cleverly kind of like rebrands it again with his, as a vehicle for his storytelling. Because you obviously would be a bit too, you can't just obviously just retell the nativity. But he uses elements of Christianity all the way through A Christmas Carol, and just tweaks them slightly, I would say.
I think that's something that has been forgotten over the years, is like what you just said about how much of a pagan holiday it is. Like where the first settlers, the Pilgrims and stuff, actually banned, the celebration of Christmas. And for a lot of years, it was just not the holiday that it is, that we know of it nowadays and stuff. And, like you said, very much Dickens kind of, rebranded it and made it more of a, I don't know, of a tradition, of a, like kind of, he definitely created more of the things that we know of as Christmas and stuff, having like, Christmas goose and, on and on, like kind of all these different things and stuff. And it's very much like a lot of things that like, these are like kind of the tropes, if you will, that kind of have evolved over time. And then part of it is like, these movies, like kind of where they kind of really amplify like kind of what people expect for Christmas, like kind of presents and having a tree and all that kind of stuff. It just kind of been more and more reinforced over the years just by, the media and, movies like Christmas Carol.
Yeah, and I think in a way he kind of he cleverly sort of twisted things to make his own kind of religious sort of take on the morality and the spirituality of Christmas. Because you've got I mean, for me, the most fascinating bit of A Christmas Carol is the three ghosts and what they actually represent. Because, you can say they represent past is memory, the present is sort of charity and empathy for people around you, and the future is more sort of our fear of death and how that impacts our lives and gives us some sort of new opportunities. But likewise, you can also map that to, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost as well. In Christianity, the Holy Ghost is representative of new life and new knowledge, which is kind of what the ghost of the future represents. And I'm still sort of on two minds whether the present is the Father or the Son or the past is, but there's definitely something there. But also, I mean, the way the imagery that he portrays the ghost of Christmas present is kind of pagan in a way. He's kind of, he makes Father Christmas into a bit more of a kind of almost Pan-like kind of figure who's surrounded by all this abundance. And, there's a sort of this weird kind of warping of different Christmas traditions, I would say, in those.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what's part of the interest of this is that we see like kind of this merging of traditions and stuff, and he does it so seamlessly that like you kind of almost forget in a way that like there's this kind of separation, if you will, between kind of pagan and religious, and really like that's part of what made Christmas sick too, because apparently like the church leaders and all that looked at the fact that like these holidays are going on anyway and stuff, and they're like, well, we can either fight them or join them and stuff. So they basically made it part of the religious traditions.
Well, I think why Christmas is obviously so, and he, I think by subverting this, he actually just refocuses your attention on what is so important about A, Christmas, and B, Christianity. And that is that, this is normally in the middle of the coldest part of the winter where people can die from cold. And, it's a good idea for society in general to be charitable and look after people during these things. And that's really what he tries to sort of hammer home. And I think that's why he purposefully takes things that almost are like Christianity, but aren't quite, but just to sort of not upset Christians, but also to kind of refocus your attention on what it is. And that's also kind of later on emphasized with the children of the Ghost of Christmas Future, who represent want and ignorance, which I think Dickens identified the two things that were the main problems with how society treated children in Victorian England. So
yeah, apparently that was like a big motivation of his for writing this story, is he saw like kind of the problems with child labor. So it's really interesting how like that, like, that's not so much a something we see as like a clear-cut theme or something he's preaching about, but yet that was like kind of one of the key things that he did want to kind of somehow get across, though, was just like the fact that like that basically people were really suffering in that time period. Because beyond even like the kids and everything, you also had this thing called debtors prison. I mean, that's something that like we don't have nowadays. We can't even imagine, right? Like if they had that, imagine how many people with the problems we have with the credit system now and stuff like that, in the sense of the people that are either defaulting on credit cards, or never mind like kind of after the real estate crash and stuff like that, we'd have most of the country in jail.
Yeah, absolutely. And conversely, you kind of see that It's a Wonderful Life has a totally different spin, and that credit is seen as this lifeline for giving people dignity and a leg up. But yeah, I mean, definitely the child labor laws, or child protection sort of laws, were a major. A lot of Oliver Twist, lots of Dickens stories are about the hardships of children's lives in Victorian England. And I mean, and what I liked about the 1951 version was that it stuck quite closely to a lot of the dialogue and the storyline of Dickens' original. And then you have, kids sorting through the rags that they were pouring through after, when he's looking at his life in the future. So they did sort of show you that, these kids were, working and enduring quite a lot of hardship.
It's interesting how, they kind of showed at different points, like kind of the kids just basically just almost on the fringes of everything, where you pretty much like see it as like kind of, it's an adult world, and, it's very much about like kind of, these very much things are transactional stuff, right? Where, the way that he's relating to Bob Cratchett, of course, his employee to boss, his nephew, even like kind of just trying to just basically show up as like kind of, hey, uncle, that kind of thing, but like he basically brushes them off and stuff, and then meanwhile the other people were like kind of wanting to get more of his money, or the charities and stuff like that, and then ultimately they end up like just the other people that like basically they're scavengers of like kind of his estate and everything. So it's like it seemed like kind of where people relate to each other in very transactional fashion, unless like kind of or in the case of kids, they're just on the fringes of otherwise and stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, you can kind of sympathize in a way with Scrooge in that the people always come, these charities and various people come around, they're using Christmas as a vehicle to gather money and stuff like this. So you kind of understand his cynicism about it, but still it doesn't, at a wider angle, it's still obviously not a very nice thing for him to do. But yeah,
I will say though that like with the 1951 version, with the way the actor played it, I mean, I swear he really looked deranged at the end. Like, just the other versions didn't have like, they reacted excitedly and kind of like seemed a little bit crazy in the sense of like kind of that like in a funny sense and stuff like that. But this one, he like seemed like he really went off the rocker.
Oh yeah. He really nailed because he was really quite sort of evil at the beginning, and when he's talking, they're talking about these poor children, he's just like, well, there's out in the debtors' prisons and the workhouses doing their job. He delivered that with a real sort of bile in his performance, and then at the end, he really does kind of, he does seem quite gleeful and insane. but in a sort of a nice way, I suppose.
And I think this is the only one that he actually had it made, right? Like, like he would, the other
Yeah.
one seemed like he was too stingy to even have something like that. Like, because a maid seems like it would be like a luxury, right? And even nowadays, of course, and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and they spent a long time on his past as well. If you actually looked at I mean, almost half the movie is him looking back on his past.
Yeah.
There's very little on the future, which is quite different from a lot of the other versions I found. But I really like Alistair Sim's version of Scrooge. I think it's pretty good. But let's get on to Tiny Tim, because both Tiny Tim and Bob Cratchit are kind of interesting characters for me, because they're quite they really tug on your heartstrings when you watch them. But there is also this criticism that like Tiny Tim is kind of a pity vehicle because he's disabled, and a lot of people complain saying that people take that kind of trope about disabled people and carry it into they're still thinking that about them, and the media has this they tend to like to play that kind of thing in other stories as well, and other reality shows in a similar sort of way. And likewise, Bob Cratchit, he's never sort of rising up against his boss or getting into any fights with him. He's this very subservient, poor person who's sort of just begging to the rich white man to pay his salary. So it's kind of a complicated one there. They're very effective tools in the story to make you sort of empathize with these people, but it's that was sort of an interesting criticism I heard of them.
Well, certainly I think except for somebody like a Bob Cratchit, nobody else would probably put up with an employer like Scrooge, right? So I think that's part of it, where the reality is that like with bosses like that, people would just suddenly go, screw this, I can get a job somewhere else. So this is somebody who just felt like, I need this job, right, and stuff. So I think that's part of, the unhealthy dynamic that, like that they have and stuff.
Yeah, it's a funny one, definitely. But I think definitely Tiny Tim. I mean, if people are wondering, I did look at what's supposed to be wrong with him, and it's supposed to be that he's got rickets, which is from a bone disorder from vitamin D deficiency, and possibly tuberculosis as well, which are both very sort of rife in Victorian England.
Yeah.
But he does sort of, for me, he represents this sort of societal empathy, because he's the only one that actually shows any kind of empathy for Scrooge, and Scrooge has to adopt him as part of his redemption, which is him sort of having some empathy for other people. It's like, I think that's sort of...
Yeah, I mean, certainly, there's, of course, later on in history, with groups like, the Nazis and stuff like that, where they would treat, like kind of anybody with a disability as just being unfit, like kind of, where it was very much a Darwinist kind of view for, like kind of whether, like kind of we should take care of the weak, so to speak, and stuff like that. And I think to me, part of that is basically, there's this quote about like kind of a mark of a great society is how well they take care of, like those who can't take care of themselves. And, like we I think that's one of the things that I feel like that's part of what Dickens is kind of highlighting, is the fact that like, we can like kind of just, discard people, or modern society does tend to have the attitude of like discarding things that are not productive, so to speak, because a lot of it is like kind of very much the industrial mentality, right, where you're either part of the industrial complex or you're like, a liability and stuff. And I think that just continued on into the 20th century. So I guess in some ways that like it was just an attitude that did kind of, lead to like kind of, groups like the Nazis and stuff like that. And even the Soviets to some degree had that, mentality and stuff.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's this idea of the industrialization of products kind of crossing over with the industrialization of society. And I guess that's the point that Dickens is trying to... He probably saw it in terms of kids and going to work, in that, basically you're industrializing your children to some degree. And a lot of his stories revolve around kids having to take on huge responsibilities at an early age, or having to work really, really hard. And I think he kind of saw the writing on the wall, so to speak, in terms of where society was moving, and probably what drove him to write such a sort of moral story about, providing a social safety net for people. And in terms of industrialization, and I think you're right, the Nazis as well is a way of, it's a sort of industrialization of genocide and ethnic cleansing, various other sort of things. That's actually the most horrifying part of it if you ever happen to visit sort of any of those historical sites. It's the sheer efficiency of it all that's the most horrifying. Sorry, go on. Yeah.
I was going to say that I think what was interesting was, the author of *Sapiens*, Navari, talks about this idea that during different times of our history, when with the technology and stuff, it translates to how we view different things outside of it. So, for example, during the industrial period, right, things were like steam and gasoline, and it was about like things like pressure and stuff like that. So then our language pretty much embodied that, where when we talk about people getting angry, right, it was like, that they feel the need to vent. And like, in other words, our language is very much structured around our view of like kind of, things at that time with the technology. Because now, as we've, like kind of with Westworld and stuff like that, we've started talking more about, networks and processing, like we talk about, the guys processing our emotions, right? And it's interesting how the language has kind of shifted towards more of that basis for our, how we view things.
Yeah, and I think you've hit on something there, because definitely the way we describe things in our language moved to sort of electrical terms as well in between. Like we had this thing, I'm feeling some resistance with this person.
Yeah.
And, and now we're in a sort of a digital age where it's either on or off. And like you said, use these sort of terms of, I need to process that, and I need to, that you can see it as opinions are you're either for it or you're against it, one or a zero, right? So we're adopting this kind of digital binary outlook on life a little bit, I think, as well. Talking of industrialization, I think this might be a good time to possibly move on to Scrooged, because that was, I watched this and I didn't realize just how ahead of its time this movie was. And I think, like we've talked about, the sort of mechanical industrialization, I think Scrooge really hits on the start of the attention economy and how, we're industrializing our attention away from real life.
Right.
That really kind of hit home for me when I watched that. And that all the way through the movie, that sort of point is hammered home, in that rather than him being miserly with his money and relationships, he's miserly with his attention, in that he spends his time watching TV. Yeah. And he, when the Ghost of Christmas Past talks to him about it, he can't differentiate between his own life and TV,
right?
Which I thought was really interesting.
That was a really striking point, that like he would make references, right, to different things, and then like the Ghost of Christmas Past would like say, like, that was Little House on the Prairie, basically pointing out that like all these different memories that it had weren't real memories. It was different things that like were from different shows that he'd watched growing up.
No, I thought that was really clever. And he's obviously he's now then producing the same sort of things that grab people's attention. I thought what was really telling about this was that he's supposed to be this ultra successful TV producer, and how he does this is by like tapping into people's most base instincts, like his is just making people afraid of Christmas, but he's also got like dancers with nipple shots. So it's kind of like, and that is pretty much where our social media has landed. News channels through the 90s, they really started amping up the fear factor of every single news, like what you should be afraid of. I don't remember, maybe there was some of that in the 80s, but I don't remember it being as severe as it got later on. So it was very much a precursor, I thought, of what was coming.
Yeah, I think around the 80s we still had like kind of this idea that the media, and specifically the news, are supposed to basically embody like some degree of integrity, and where they're supposed to represent the values of like kind of printing the truth or getting the truth out there, stuff like that. Had reporters like Walter Cronkite and like Dan Rather, and like these are figures that like I still remember as like kind of where you look to them not only for these basic news story, and somebody who you turn to each night to get like kind of the scoop on what was going on, but you had to sense that like that like they not only got their facts straight, but they were reporting it in a very human way and stuff, and that a lot of that kind of seemed like it just slowly like kind of inch by inch kind of just gave way to like you said, the more sensational news. The Fox News started kind of appearing and stuff like that. The Gerardo Rivera's of the world started becoming that became representative of what was newsworthy then.
But I think also you can't really give these guys, the old newscasters, a complete break in that.
Oh yeah,
being that the news cycle was much slower and the producers had more time to craft their biases directly into the story. Whereas you get the sense these days that everything moves so fast that people, and they don't want to hire real investigative journalists, that they're just kind of like playing it by ear most of the time and just going with what all the other news stories think of as the story of the day. Yeah,
definitely. Like it with the anchors, if you will, they became more of a image, right? Like where somebody who can seem credible and stuff, like the Peter Jennings, if you will, that they were somebody who like just could slickly provide the news in a polished way that like that definitely just seemed to be credible enough. And that was more important, like to have the image of like kind of credibility than it was like kind of like you said, knowing that we had like hardcore like investigative reporting or anything like that.
Yeah. No, it's definitely changed. I was going to ask you, what did you think of the breaking of the fourth wall at the end of Scrooged?
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Because I think that was for me, it kind of tied in with the general theme of it in that he's wasted his whole life in front of a screen. Why are you even wasting your life watching the movie? And he's there talking to the audience in the story, and then he's actually talking directly to the audience at the end of the movie, kind of sort of. And so they're breaking one fourth wall and then a kind of a second one as well.
Yeah, apparently that was a Bill Murray move because that was not the script. Like there was an interview where Karen Allen talked about that, and the director actually was originally not happy with him doing that. Which is of course like kind of pretty typical. But like basically they kept it in because I guess it was so effective in how like the whole cast and crew basically applauded him afterwards, like kind of so as a director, right, when you see like kind of something like that having the reaction on people, what can you do, right? You can be a Scrooge and like kind of go like kind of bah humbug and stuff like that, or you basically like go like realize I'm fighting a losing fight, like kind of, and I think that's one of the reasons why it was kept in.
It's funny because, I know that Bill Murray was not very happy when he made Scrooge. He was pretty miserable through most of it. Didn't like Richard, or had a lot of friction with Richard Donner. And it's almost I think you hit on it when you said, him as a filmmaker can't really turn around and say, okay, yeah, you can tell people not to watch TV, but when it comes to my movie, that's where we draw the line, right? You can't tell people that with them watching this movie is a waste of time. But it's kind of, in a way, I think it's a really clever movie. I mean, I think Bill did it just to get back at Richard Donner, but in a way, it does actually kind of it abstracts the whole message of the movie one layer further, which kind of makes it cleverer. But I did find it very unsatisfying there, and I realized that like breaking of fourth walls is like something that's, I don't know, I think you have to do very carefully because you spend so much time creating this little fictionalized box for you to tell your story, and I think, and maybe it's just my take on it, but I think breaking out of that sometimes it's just has this sort of especially, and maybe it's just right at the end when you want everything to be sort of not neatly tied up in a bow and it's kind of just like no, forget it, we're all just breaking the fourth wall, we're talking you directly now. It kind of just feels like a bit of a cop out, but still in the bigger message of the movie it kind of makes sense in a way.
Yeah, I thought it worked for that reason. Like you said, that it really symbolizes the message, And I think if anybody can pull it off, it's also Bill Murray, where
Yeah.
he seems to just have this ability, right, to, like just about every movie that like I can remember that where he was most effective was when he was like that you felt like he was talking to you. I kind of like when you think like one of the earliest movies that I still remember as a kid was Meatballs, right? Where the classic moment was like him rallying the troops and stuff like that, right? And even though that like he wasn't breaking the fourth wall, it definitely felt like it because you felt like you were with the kids, like kind of like everything's like kind of looking bleak and everything like that. So screw it, like kind of we're gonna just basically like just charge the fence, so to speak, and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, he has this amazing ability of reacting to scenes in a way that you're kind of thinking about as a viewer. Like a lot of his lines in Ghostbusters are kind of like these ones where like you'd be thinking the same thing, of just like he's there like flicking the ectoplasm off his hands, going, "Oh God, I've got it in my eye," and things like this. Just like real sort of exactly the sort of things you'd be thinking. It's just he's very, very good at that.
I think overall, like this 88 version just had such memorable characters, like Bob Goldthwaite, like Carol Kane as the ghost of Christmas Present. Like just any moment that she was on there was like worth at least a chuckle.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting that they kind of, if she's representing empathy and charity, it's almost like, and it kind of goes along with the Live Aid kind of thing. It's like I think it's maybe because we're in a more global broadcast kind of culture during the 80s where, satellite TV made you aware of all the problems in the world, that perhaps there's that much more urgency over her character. That's why she's beating him up, sort of saying, come on, be more charitable. I think maybe she represents some of that new kind of realization that people had about problems at that time, maybe.
Well, also, I think at that time, I remember in the 80s kind of being where like there was a lot of the, it just seemed like a lot of the media overall was about like kind of just being in your face, right? Where, if you look at like, anything from the fashion to, like music videos, right? Like, like remember the whole MTV thing, right? Where it's like kind of, wow, it was something like, things would be kind of like, at a low simmer, stuff like that. And then like the MTV logo would come on and be like this blasting kind of, effect and stuff. And I think that's to me, a lot of the media at that time was like, how can you be bigger, bolder, louder, kind of, because even action movies, right, were about like, how much can you have bigger explosions, right? That was like part of the whole thing.
Absolutely, yeah. They did just get totally out of hand during the 80s. But I mean, another interesting thing in Scrooged is that the Ghost of Christmas Future is a screen. His face and that's again is this kind of thing where the character is kind of he's looking at the scene in this kind of like mental health asylum, I guess, for Calvin, and then he's there's this sort of again blending of, is his life a screen or isn't it? And it's interesting that they use Calvin as the kind of Tiny Tim character is mental health problems rather than physical problems.
Yeah, that is true.
In Scrooged. So
I think it was around that time when we started kind of doing more the treating the mental health as more of a disease. Like it wasn't so much like less of something in your mind, right? Where it was like kind of something that like people imagine, so to speak. In there, like we started treating more mental illness as more seriously something that needed kind of treatment. Unfortunately, part of the side effect of that, though, was like also where big pharma started kind of getting onto that.
Yeah, I was going to say,
it was started using medication as well to treat mental illness, for better, for worse.
Yeah, I guess mental illness was sort of legitimized through the business of the pharma industry to some degree. So, yeah.
I mean, from what I understand, certainly there are like some different, mental illnesses that are effectively treated by, like whether it's the lithium or like kind of things that like where the people actually there's no real other way to kind of help treat them, and effectively and stuff. On the other hand, like kind of we did also start using like things like Ritalin for kids that were misbehaving and saying like, oh, they have ADHD. So therefore, we're going to basically, medicate them and stuff. When all it was like, these are just energetic kids, and they just, like kind of were bored by school.
Yeah, yeah. What, you don't want to sit down at a desk for 8 hours in the day? What's wrong with you? Yeah, yeah. So I don't know if there was anything else you wanted to. The only other thing that got me about the ending speech, with him being so overly emotive, it really kind of reminded me of YouTubers doing some sort of over emotive kind of monologue about either how they're apologizing for something or how they're excited about something. And there was this odd sort of again, I kind of felt like we were peering into the future a little bit of the attention economy.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting how, like you said, it just basically foreshadowed the things like, were to come for media, and just overall, like, kind of just the things that like just are now like part of our everyday life and social media.
Yeah, we're all producers now, like Frank Ross, I suppose. Yeah.
So stepping a little bit back with the, which is interesting how this one, 98, right? Like it's 10 years after this one, but we're stepping back into a Western. So it's kind of an odd kind of, mix. So what are your thoughts about, like, kind of,
I mean, I thought it was pretty funny, in all honesty. Jack Palance was the only famous person that I really recognized in it. And he just goes from being a really kind of mean, cheating, evil, manically cigar-chewing Scrooge.
Right.
Transformation isn't much of a transformation. He still seems pretty psychotic, even at the end, and he's just doing the odd nice thing, but he still basically seems like a psycho. And I knew there had to be some kind of shootout at some point in the movie. It was, of course, it was kind of interesting sort of take on it. But I'll be honest, I kind of, after about the first half an hour, I kind of skipped over a couple of the ghosts and I went straight to the shootout. I figured that's probably, I wanted to see how his future life, he didn't seem too bothered by his future life, really. He didn't seem to have some massive redemptive arc. Just like, I guess I shouldn't kill people. So
overall, I thought it's just such an odd set piece, like where, here you have Jack Palance, right, where, I guess in a lot of ways, I felt like this was a self-parody because, it's like when we see a movie with Jack Palance, you kind of know what you're going to get, right? It's kind of, he's going to be this kind of menacing dude. In this one, I thought like, I just, no matter what he did right towards the end, as, the kind of the reformed Scrooge, I felt like it almost couldn't redeem how much evil he was, before that.
Yeah. And you kind of got if he was giving you a goose, it would kind of be just like, you better just take that goose. Because, you don't want him to sort of like shoot you, So it was quite a sort of weird and funny take on Christmas Carol from my experience. But yeah.
I think more significant then is like kind of just this idea of like, okay, what was the point of like kind of doing, like, or for that matter, what is the point of doing a remake of A Christmas Carol and stuff? And like for this one, right, like I think it's a case in point for that. That here we are like 10 years after the 80s version with Bill Murray and stuff. So they do this. I mean, is it just like doing it just for the sake of doing it? And like, okay, why not do a Western one? Why not do a one out in space? So like kind of, it seemed like almost like that kind of idea. And and then, like, is that enough a reason to do another version of A Christmas Carol?
Well, I mean, this goes back to your point that you started with, this idea of like, why do we watch this redemptive Christmas story over and over again every Christmas? And it's kind of, I think, you were saying like, we watch Scrooge changing so dramatically, and we love to watch this kind of change, but do we do it ourselves? Is it the fact of us watching Scrooge do it? It kind of, it does it for us, and we feel like, that's okay, I'll put that off till next year or something. It's kind of one of these, there's this idea that, if you tell people your goals and plans, you are less likely to do it because you've got this kind of social acceptance of the idea, and that is half the battle of getting it, you feel like you've realized it but haven't really. So I don't know if there's something like that going on with these never-ending redemptive stories of Christmas.
No, I think there's something to that because of the fact that like where at different times, it's now more known to be science that we do kind of live these stories, whether we're watching movies and shows and stuff. And just by that fact that like our brains different times almost can't tell the difference and stuff, it does like kind of, we do experience it like as if, like kind of, that idea of, we feel like we're living the story through the characters and stuff. We are actually doing that. Like there's neuroscience that kind of backs that up and everything. I think that's fascinating. These things called mirror neurons. So to some degree, that's true what you just said, that like, it is like almost like a way that we kind of let ourselves off from having to actually do the work, because that's really what it comes down to, is like kind of, no matter how redemptive, like kind of, and maybe it feels good to kind of, be a changed person, stuff like that, but it takes work. I mean, that's really the reality of it too. Like kind of, you have to kind of, do something. Maybe it is like kind of, helping Tiny Tim through the treatment and stuff. Maybe it is like kind of, like, giving your employee a raise and stuff like that. You got to actually make some efforts to kind of do these things that is a reflection of the change that you're, in theory, kind of going through and stuff.
Well, I think that's also one of the things with this story is that, the character has to face his own death to realize the value of life. And it just makes me think of like Steve Jobs, who apparently would go through, every day saying, at the end of it, how has this day moved me more towards my end goal of how I see my life? If I died tomorrow, would I have done something today that pushed me in the direction that I should be going? So it's, it's obviously another sort of tool that's used in this, but a powerful one, clearly, in storytelling.
Definitely.
I mean, the only other one I can think of, obviously, that's a kind of a twist on that is Back to the Future, where you kind of get another story about someone who sees not only their own life in the context of different times, but also the threat of people he knows and loves sort of dying off and stuff like this. And we kind of went through this in Oldboy a little bit when we did that. We talked about that. I think but in this one, I guess what's interesting is that when you see ancestors as well, but it's a similar concept, this idea of taking a long-term view over life in the story is a powerful one, interesting one. I think making it engaging and filled with action, I think, is the hard part. I think that's why you need ghosts in it, to kind of make it scary or make it kind of, something where you're not just like, it's not like a biography or something, you've got some action to punctuate these points. So.
Well, I think that's an interesting point then, which, offline we talked about this, about the idea of Iron Man being a version of, Christmas Story, because that's one done without ghosts and stuff, or in the actual, like kind of literal sense. But metaphorically, apparently, just based on this one essay, we'll have to share the link and stuff. He was visited by these different ghosts in a metaphorical sense.
Yeah, you had the Ghost of Christmas Past was a one-night stand. The bad guy is the Ghost of Christmas Future, and I think it was like the little boy is the Ghost of Christmas Present.
Apparently, yeah.
Did I get it right? Something like that.
I think so, yeah.
But then who's Tiny Tim? Like Rodin or Pepper Potts? I don't know.
Well, it did seem like the kid was also like maybe a stand-in for Tiny Tim as well, like kind of to some degree, because he was without a father, and I guess maybe that's kind of how he's like both, in the sense where if there was a Bob Cratchett, so where I guess Happy is in theory Bob Cratchett and stuff.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I don't really. Yeah. Again, though, he doesn't have a wife or anyone depending on his sort of livelihood. Yeah, it's a bit of a reach for me, but it was quite of interesting that was the comparison that was made.
Until rewatching it that way, I mean, the first time I saw it, all the Christmas stuff, I had totally, I just totally ignored all that. Part of it was the film was released in April, and so it was a really odd, like, kind of, choice to kind of, have. I think the only thing I can think of is that the production must have, somehow slid and stuff, and they missed the holiday release, and then well, let's slip it into April, because it's the in between spot, I guess.
I guess somebody must have said, "What about Easter? That's kind of religious too." And then, yeah, okay, let's go with that. But yeah, that was an interesting one. Yeah, I'll have to. I didn't get a chance to watch it again, but maybe I will over Christmas. We'll see. So the other one we may have to sort of do an addendum to this video is the new 2019 one with produced by Ridley Scott and Tom Hardy, which looks quite sort of dark and gritty. But it does seem, at least from the trailer, that Scrooge is now blowing up people. So they've obviously amped up the evil a little bit.
Right.
If I have one prediction, it will be that if Tom Hardy is involved in this at all, that at least one of the ghosts will be incomprehensible. That's my major prediction. We'll see if I'm right. I don't know.
I have a feeling that you will be correct, sir.
We'll see. But I'm looking forward to it, and we'll have to, maybe tag that on as well. We'll see.
Yeah, and certainly like a subgenre of the whole Christmas Carol thing is like we could probably do one where we just looked at the musical versions of this, because like it seemed like just every other like version had to be musical for some reason. So somehow that became attached, just as much as like A Star Is Born, right?
Yeah. Oh God. I don't know if I can compare 3 different musical versions of A Christmas Carol. That sounds to me like the Ghost of Christmas Future has got a dark path for me with that one. But yeah, maybe at some point when we start running out of others, maybe we'll go into that one. Christmas musicals.
Alrighty. So the next up, I guess, in our trilogy of holiday, remakes versus originals will be Black Christmas. So that'll be an interesting one to look at. Both because it's a holiday themed movie, but also bring something to it that like seems like almost taboo, right? Where there's been a few films over the years that like combining horror with Christmas has just been kind of as controversial as the movie itself and stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, Scrooged even got into trouble with critics for being dark, A Christmas Tale. But it should be good.
Alrighty. So yeah, I think that's all for this time. I'm John Chang.
I'm Dan Evans.
And till next time, we'll see you at the movies.